Hello everyone, welcome back to OCD Recovery. Before I go any further, if you could please subscribe down below. There's a lot of videos going up. As I've mentioned before, the new channel, OCDrecovery.com, lots of great resources. The reading list is on there. There's just a great community right now, the Facebook page, the Instagram page, and there's just free resources for people going through the journey, some people that may not be able to afford care, and there's just a lot of good stuff to help you get underneath your core fears and how to move with uncertainty. So we have a seminar coming up, or a webinar, on Somatic OCD, aka called Hyper Awareness, on April 28th at 3 p.m. GMT time. And which would be for me in Colorado, 8 a.m. Mountain time. And it's going to be great. We're going to cover why people stay stuck with Somatic OCD, how to get towards your fears, maybe what's involved with the journey, and so forth. So I'm doing a recap video on Somatic OCD. I'm going to cover a bunch of different topics. Some things may be new. I'm going to go over my story again if people that haven't watched. So let's start off with what is Somatic OCD. Somatic OCD is also called hyper-awareness, okay? And the most common ones are breathing, blinking, swallowing, saliva, maybe seeing the bridge of your nose. But it basically could be any sort of thing in your body that you could become hyper-aware of. This is a very interesting thing because just like all OCDs that turn chronic, if you talk to anyone who's either in recovery, going through recovery, at the beginning stages of OCD, it kind of just lashes like a light switch. So it's really, really easy to think to yourself in the beginning, what is going on? This wasn't there yesterday, and now it's there today. And as we know, when we go through recovery and use the tools, that actually doesn't quite matter because you are where you are, and the only way to go forward is to go forward because unfortunately, the hyper-awareness more than likely will not go away on its own. So like I said, it's also known as hyper-awareness, and you basically feel as if you're locked internally. I used a great analogy / metaphor when I was talking to Rob on the phone one time. We were laughing about this. It's almost like for me, I have swallowing and saliva OCD on the back end. When I talk about it right now, it might bring it up a little bit, but there's no fear involved. So basically, it's like taking Capri Suns and squeezing them underneath your mouth. That's what I felt like all day, every day, just hours, nonstop, so forth. So it was a very challenging time in my life, and it left me really distressed. So I was graduating chiropractic school, taking national boards. I was doing schoolwork like 80 hours a week, and that's when it latched. After I was suffering with bilateral tinnitus, so ringing in the ear, or tinnitus, as some people call it, for about 3 months. And I was really sleep deprived. I was sleeping like an hour a day for 3 months. That was the only real time I really struggled with sleep. So I do understand, if you're watching this struggling with sleep, it's not fun. But the good news is you can fully recover from that. And one of the biggest misconceptions is that can leave people maybe feeling a little bit alone. And as we know, OCD will always try to make you feel like you're the only one, or you're the worst, or yours is bad. A lot of people with somatic OCD might think they're treatment resistant because it's not one of the, say, more common themes, because it's not talked about a whole lot, like, harm OCD or contamination OCD is probably the most global one, or ROCD. But just because it's less common doesn't mean you can't fully recover. Paul Little, who's one of my friends, who was one of the first people I watched, who has fully recovered from somatic OCD, or, a cusp before full recovery, I had to talk to him a lot in the beginning because I was, well, not in the beginning, recently, because I really was still in some way trying to fight it internally. And this is why we talk about shifts when you're going through OCD recovery. It comes in stages of shifts. And it's really easy to try and force acceptance and recovery when you have somatic OCD because that sensation is inside you and it's never going away. The reality is you're never not going to breathe, you're never not going to salivate, you're never not going to blink. The bridge of your nose is always going to be there and all these things because that's part of your human anatomy and your physiology. If you didn't breathe, you would die. So again, it could be any sensation you're scared of, any single one. That's why I've talked to a couple people that might have like an odd off one that maybe not a lot of people have experienced, but you still go throughout it the same way, which we will cover later in this video. So, as I said, and Rob has talked about this before, it almost feels like you're constantly being tortured. Just 24/7, nonstop, relentless in its own way. And something I experience in a lot of people that have somatic OCD or hyper-awareness, I don't like to base it in the categories, but it is interesting when you talk to certain people. a lot of people that have, say, just maybe somatic OCD or physical anxiety symptoms might not have as many classic intrusive thoughts. Like, they're not on the loop all day like some people. This isn't inherently bad or worse, but for myself, I can go months without intrusive thoughts. But I have lots of intrusive sensations and urges. And this is where people get stuck, because they'll think, well, I don't have intrusive thoughts. I have these urges and sensations, so I must be different. You're not. One of the biggest misconceptions in the OCD community is that OCD is strictly thoughts. It's not. It's sensations, it's urges, it's feelings, it's images, it's all sorts of stuff like that. And that's where people get lost, because if you don't understand that in the beginning, which I didn't, that will make you think you're treatment resistant and stuff like that. And as we know, in the opinions of people with OCD recovery, we do not think that treatment resistant is a real thing. Some people just might take them 5 years to get underneath your fear. But it's better working it for 5 years than having to deal with OCD for the rest of your life. This is something you want to think about. So why we remain stuck. This is a really, really big one. One of the number one things that keeps somatic OCD people stuck is the belief they hold about the sensation. So I can't stand it and my life is ruined is probably the most common one. So when I was going through my journey in the beginning, I used to always be seeking reassurance from my wife. And I'm really good at that now. I don't seek reassurance at all. And I would say to my wife, I'd go into a room and be like, am I going to be okay? Am I going to stop noticing this? That's the key. Do you hear what I just said? Am I going to stop noticing this? It is not about noticing it. A lot of somatic OCD people will probably move into a further part of recovery, but still have a belief in their mind that it's about not noticing the sensation ever again. That sensation has been there since you were born. You just became very scared of it and locked in the OCD cycle. But that sensation is never going away. Once you start really working and accepting that, that's when the fear level starts to come down. That's when the chronic anxiety can start to come down over time. What if I never stop noticing this? Another big one. Rightfully so. It's not, as I like to say, it's not that the sensation itself is what's causing the anxiety. It's the intrusiveness of the sensation. That's why it's not called thoughts. It's called intrusive thoughts, intrusive urges, intrusive sensations. The thoughts are coming at, the sensations are coming at such a nonstop pace, and they're so intrusive that it's really easy to make you feel like that is just like your truth. You are now internally locked. You're going to be noticing this forever. So I completely understand why you think that. Because I thought that for the better part of 1 year and 4 months. It took me a really long time to start moving towards recovery. And I'm definitely not recovered, but wow, am I a lot better than where I was. So the treatment resistant is one of the other big things, as we covered before. A lot of somatic OCD people will believe that they're treatment resistant because we see a lot of people on social media, not OCD recovery, but like other ones and forums and, Dr. Phil and talking about, the common ones like contamination OCD, Howie Mandel from, Britain's Got Talent and stuff like that. So it's really easy to look and say to yourself, oh, wow, well, man, look at that one. That's not me. Like, I don't have that. I'm not scared about being dirty. What's the sensation I'm afraid of? And I have to be treatment resistant. Also, this isn't to say anything bad. Most people in the OCD community, working with people and sufferers, do not fully understand somatic OCD. They know less about somatic OCD than, say, contamination or harm, because some of the exposures for, say, contamination OCD can be very graded and logically written in a format for a treatment plan. But what a lot of people get wrong is no amount of exposures, if you're seeking, because you see a lot of people, great intentions, nothing wrong with this. Exposures, as we know, is a gold standard. ERP, exposure, response, prevention, preventing a response. But you can do all the exposures in the world. If you're extremely scared of your fear, it's going to cut through those exposures for the most part. You can get to a certain place and manage. So a lot of people with somatic OCD might be working on recovery for 2 years. It's a long time. I get it. 2 years. This is as best as it's going to get. It's not true. It's not as best as it's going to get. You can fully recover. You just have to keep working on recovery as long as it takes. That mindset is gigantic. And why we remain stuck, the last thing is looking for shortcuts. Somatic OCD is very interesting Because it's so internally driven, there are certain techniques that we do not recommend as your primary source for OCD recovery. I have to talk about this. I was very biased and very against mindfulness. I think it stemmed because of the fact that I knew, in my opinion, that it wasn't the true path out. Mindfulness is important. Mindfulness has different definition, but this is the global definition of mindfulness. It is observing a situation, whether it's mental or physical, and observing and not reacting. That's wearing anxiety like an uncomfortable coat. You can overlap that. But the problem is, as Dr. Albert Ellis says, being aware, convincing yourself that you're a good driver is not going to make you a good driver. So just observing the sensation, but still being scared, is not actually going to get under it fully. You have to go towards your fears. You have to look at why you can't stand it, why you believe you can't stand it, which you can because you're still here. Not saying it's going to be comfortable. Why you believe your life is ruined. Your life is not ruined. You're here watching this video with me right now. Your life is just maybe a little bit more uncomfortable than it was, but it's not the catastrophizing, terribilizing, awfulizing that we see it. And that is really what keeps us really stuck. So these short-term methods, I get it. Like you really want it gone. We all want it gone. This isn't just somatic OCD. It's uncomfortable. Humans are obsessed with comfort, and we want it gone right now. But the reality is, it's not going to go that quickly. I'm not saying like for decades of working on recovery, but it might take you a little bit longer than you want. This is why we don't use deadlines at OCD recovery. I know there's people out there that use deadlines. It can leave people really stuck and hopeless because they'll get to that deadline and they'll be so focused on the deadline they actually won't even be that focused on their OCD, the recovery. I mean, and that can be problematic. So those shortcuts, breathing, meditation, yoga, all great stuff for different aspects of life and can really help people. Not saying they may not be important further along in your recovery journey, because a lot of the later parts of your recovery journey is going throughout your day with not constant, but sensations coming up, urges, images, intrusive thoughts, as you start to bring your fear down. Once you start engaging with the thoughts as they come in, Kirsty has talked about this a lot, and Jade has talked about this as well, and about engaging with the thoughts as you come in. I see a lot of people talk about this with somatic OCD. Well, because the sensation is constant, you can't engage with it every time you feel it, because that would be a clear-cut compulsion trying to change your internal state. So one of the biggest problems that we have is we have an internal thermometer that we gauge. Am I feeling better today? Am I feeling better this moment? I have done this thousands of times, hundreds of thousands of times on my recovery journey. I still do it at times. You get set back, you go back and you say to yourself, well, wait a second, this isn't how I started recovering the last time. I pushed myself forward, and that's what brings you to new perspectives, as we've talked about. So, as I said, what probably won't work? We talked about yoga, meditation, and breathing. Again, can be really helpful in life. Probably not so good with somatic OCD specifically. Every single OCD has the same path to recovery. We all know it comes down to disputing irrational beliefs, moving with uncertainty, gold standard, cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure response prevention, and stuff like that. But everyone's are going to be different. That's why comparative suffering, as Kirsty just did in another video, is terrific. Great video. My wife was really big on that because I would say stuff like, oh my gosh, these people don't understand how much I'm suffering, but there's a zero ROI on that, return on investment. So the measuring the internal thermometer, we talked about that already. That's good. Timelines and comparative suffering, forcing exposures, as I said. So how do I say this properly, or how I think? So exposures are obviously important, but when you're forcefully trying to go after exposures for repeatedly for months and months, that can become compulsive. A lot of people get that wrong. So a lot of people will maybe you wake up and you're like, yeah, not feeling too good. Let's go do some exposures. Let's go after an exposure. That is an actual compulsion. Exposures can become compulsions really quickly for somatic OCD. That's why, I need to meditate, because I have to feel that sensation. I must feel that sensation. That sensation's there. If you're forcefully trying to experience it, that's why mindfulness can become a compulsion too. This is why the journey to OCD, the analogy or the metaphor I've used before is, say you go to a spa and you see like a wall where the waterfall's going down. You have the water that's in the front, road to recovery, but then you have the cracks where the water might go in and go different directions. Those are the internal networks of OCD recovery that it's very hard to understand what it's like unless you've been there. I'm not saying that, again, this is not saying that if you don't have OCD, you can't help people, because that's not true and that's nonsense. That's like saying someone who helps people in AA, Alcohol Anonymous, can't help people recover from being an alcoholic if they weren't an alcoholic. There is just a factor that you might be able to connect with that person a little bit better emotionally, spiritually, however you want to say it, because they've been there and they might be able to have more empathy. But that doesn't mean that someone who doesn't have OCD can't help you. And we know that. Long-term distractions. Just distract yourself. Think about something else. Internal compulsion doesn't work with somatic OCD. It will just keep coming back. Boom, 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 boom. So what probably works for OCD recovery? I put probably, but reality is what we know works. Moving with uncertainty. And what do I mean by that? Maybe you're going to be a little bit more hyper-aware today. Maybe your anxiety is going to be a little bit higher. Maybe things are going to be a little bit tougher for you today. Maybe you might have a relapse, and moving with that uncertainty is a huge part of what we talk about in OCD recovery. Disputing irrational beliefs. Going back to the I can't stand it-itis, it's going to ruin my life. Breaking those down, one time maybe in the morning, one time at night. Kirsty, Jade, they talked about this very well. Oliver's talked about this. Hannah's talked about this. Anyone who's a moderator, Sadie that's talked about this, anyone that is a moderator, there's other people I'm just forgetting right now. We have talked about, spending time during your day. Kirsty's the most recent videos, you don't engage with the thoughts as they come in. That can become a compulsion. It's not that it's necessarily bad, but like if you're hyper aware of your sensations and then you say, nope, I'm going to neutralize it. That is the definition of internal compulsion. So time and patience. OCD recovery is doable and we know it's possible. Full recovery. Got to talk about this for a second. Management is great. A lot of people get to managing. That's awesome. Managing is not recovery. Okay? They're two separate things. Recovery is recovery. Management is management. A lot of people are managing their OCD as they go towards full recovery. As you're in full recovery, you have to maintain that recovery. So there is some overlap, but it's not the same thing. There is no cure as of right now. As of right now, the current literature, I'm a nerd, so the current empirical data, okay, one of the parts of evidence-based triad is we're pretty sure that OCD is a gene, okay? Statistically speaking, it might affect 2% of the population. 2% of the population may have the gene. 2% of the population are not chronic sufferers. Something a lot of people get wrong who don't understand basically looking at data, for research. It's just because something shows something doesn't mean correlation means causation. So time and patience. Probably going to take a little bit longer than you want it to. And that's okay. That's just part of the journey. The reading list. There's a reason why I was making a joke today about putting on my tombstone, did you read the reading list? Because it's important. And the reading list is really, really important. And we love the reading list. It helps you learn how to dispute irrational beliefs. You can see where Albert Ellis comes from and so forth. So it's really good. Stop the internal fight in the mindset. I got to stop this in a minute. So the mindset cannot be overlooked. You have to want to recover no matter what comes at you. You have to, nobody in this video, me, talking to you right now is not going to make you recover. I wish it did, but what you got to do is you kind of got to go towards the uncomfortability. You have to go towards the pain. Whatever you are dealing with, you have to go towards it, start breaking down your fears in order to get over it, recover. This can't be overlooked. The mindset is so important with everything in life. That mindset of, Oliver said it perfectly in like a video 4 months ago. He was like something along the lines of, you have to be willing to accept any amount of time that it's going to take for you to recover. That's super important. So thank you so much for watching. Again, please subscribe. Lots of great videos. If you have any dealing with Kirsty's, everyone's are amazing. Jay just did a really good one on pregnancy. But April 28th, 3 p.m. GMT time, sensory motor webinar. Thank you so much. Have a good one.